Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. If you want to be the hero of the day, make sure you support the channel by hitting the like and subscribe buttons down below. And our first story of the day is by Pipe Organ Transplant. Typical jerk neighbors complain about the truck in my yard, so I replace it. I live in a mostly quiet neighborhood with lots of snowbirds and weekenders because of the proximity to a lake. The year-rounders are mostly retired and people generally get along fine. A couple years ago, neighbors on one side built a new garage and driveway, moving their cars much closer to my existing forsythia hedge. I love the forsythia in spring and basically let it grow however it likes so I can have the bright yellow flowers. Almost immediately they started complaining that the hedge blocked their view as they backed out of their driveway. In my state, neighbors have no right to a view extending over someone else's property, and our Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that as long as trees and bushes do not actually impinge onto the roadway, property owners have no obligation to trim for visibility. I keep a 5-foot strip mowed between my hedge and the road, perfectly reasonable to my way of thinking. Since they have no recourse per the hedges, they instead complain to county code enforcement about anything else they can think of. My brother parked his licensed and insured project truck on my property a while back because he was in the process of moving and needed a spot for it while he was figuring things out. In the meantime, he was in a bad accident in another vehicle and the truck had been sitting for over a year now. The license plate recently expired and I got a letter from the county with threats of fines if it wasn't removed. Cue the malicious compliance. My brother decided to sell the truck for scrap and had it towed away this morning. This gave my neighbors their temporary victory as they observed from their deck and nearly 6 inches of improved view from their driveway. At least until I moved my second vehicle, a 1960 Lincoln, which is about 2 feet longer than the truck, with current plates and insurance, into that place this afternoon. As a single person with more than one vehicle, I may get around to driving that old car at least once more before winter. Let me ask you guys. If you were living someplace with a neighbor that hated you or hated the way you were doing things and called the code enforcement, called police or whatever just to try and get on your nerves, maybe try and make you conform to their demands, would you be the kind of person to fight back with that however you could? Whether it's parking something bigger in the way or growing the hedges taller or doing anything that'll just get right back at them? Or would you be the type of person to keep your head down, stay focused on you, not worry about them? Let me know what your approach would be in the comments down below. Our next story is by Our Lady of Space. Free sample? I worked at a grocery store deli where we were supposed to offer a sample of the sliced lunch meat prior to finishing the order, to ensure it was cut to their preference and they could take the sample to taste it if they wanted to. We would get mystery shopped, so the managers were really militant about it, and I'd already been told a few times that I needed to be better about doing it or they'd write me up. It was just annoying to get the meat out, slice a piece, check it with the customer, and then go back to slicing, especially if we were slammed busy. One day, I had a young couple ask me to slice a fairly thick piece, maybe half an inch, of lunch meat ham so they could cube it and put it in a quiche. I said sure, no problem, and to ensure compliance with work policy, I sliced them a half-inch thick slice and handed it to them and asked if they'd like a sample. They nervously glanced at each other and then me and said, "Seriously?" I said, "Of course, we always slice a sample." They kept it, put it in the bag with the non-sample slice, and essentially got a 2-for-1 deal. Not a huge victory, but just petty enough to make me feel nice. I mean, if I got chewed out for doing such a thing or not doing enough of a thing, and I had a chance to make someone's day and comply with that demand, wouldn't hurt to do it one time just to feel a little bit better. It was a pretty wholesome malicious compliance. Our next story is by KnitChick82. Can't replace my boots unless they're damaged? Okay then. Somewhere in the 2000s, I went to basic training with the Army. As part of my issue, I received 2 pairs of boots, affectionately known as Summers and Winters for obvious reasons. I tried them on at CIF and had a hard time with the Summers. They had this god-awful seam that was chewing at the back of my heels. CIF in all their wisdom said, "They fit, nothing we can do." It was so bad that I was bleeding and couldn't even march. I was in tears from the pain. I figured it was worth getting smoked for wearing Winters in June. It was such a relief to not feel constant grinding on my heels. I didn't even care. They eventually had to put me on a sneaker profile while at camp on the 12 Mile. Finally, after 10 weeks suffering by boot or by smoking, we made it to AIT. At AIT, soldiers are allowed to DX, trade in, clothing, where we weren't allowed at all in basic. So I go off to go DX my boots. Finally, I fill in my form, hand the boots over, and get told, "Sorry, we can't DX clothing unless it's damaged." I explained the situation, and the soldier at the counter stared at me and restated, "They're not damaged." Resigned to my fate, I took my boots of pain plus 3 AC to a nearby bench where a fellow soldier sat. She wielded a pair of scissors with such ferocity that her boots didn't stand a chance. I asked her in my E3 naivety, "Why are you cutting holes in your boots?" She explained to me that CIF won't allow a DX unless the item's damaged. I was shocked. What a waste of money. What a waste of boots that may have had some redeeming value as a planter. She then handed me the scissors. "Need them?" "I'm done." She raised her eyebrow as to ask. I grabbed the scissors and went to town on those darn boots. I revisited the counter with my damaged boots, the DX went smoothly, and my new summers fit great. I never had another problem with my boots in 6 years. You'd really feel like there should have been some kind of opportunity where, if some kind of issued uniform didn't fit well or was chafing or had some kind of issue, you could have exchanged them or reported them or had some kind of fix of any kind being considered. It's disappointing to see that even though it was making them bleed, they still got in trouble for not wearing them and cutting their feet up. Our next story is by Swordfish Trombone 13, Time Clock Compliance. After becoming burned out being a tech guy, I had an opportunity to work in a special program in a completely unrelated field, but one that made use of my secondary set of skills. I joined as a member of the department, and through a series of hilariously cringy actions by the head of the department, ended up being the assistant to the director who replaced the director that hired me. He and I got along swimmingly, and we rebuilt the entire department to not be a money pit like it was before. Our time clock is web-based, but our internet connection is iffy at the best of times. Sometimes punches would go missing or don't even get recorded. I asked for permission to have access to edit punches so the main office that took forever to make edits didn't have to deal with it. This was granted, and things shaped up even more. As assistant director, I had a guaranteed 40 each week, but was hourly and not salary. Because of the frenetic pace of what I do, punching the clock can be tricky as I do lots of work before and after scheduled time. I don't mind this because my days are pretty easy in general, and my boss and I are very casual in interaction. He trusts me, and I wouldn't dare betray that trust. My erratic clock punches began to accrue over time, and the CFO caught wind of this and gently told me that I cannot get overtime unless it's an emergency or crunch/busy in our industry. After talking with my boss, we decided to allow me to edit my times to get the straight 40 to appease the CFO. 3 years pass, and I asked for a raise. Hey, I'd been comfortable, but 3 years without a raise seemed a bit much. The CFO grants my raise, but tells me that I cannot edit my times, that I have to punch in and out like everyone else. I explain the situation to him, but he's old and set in his ways and says this is the way things are. I tell my boss who's not happy about this, but we come up with a malicious compliance plan. I clock in like everyone else, a few minutes before start and a few minutes after for end. These few minutes add up, and before you know it, I'm getting at least an extra hour per week. The CFO calls me and says, "Hey, you can't get overtime." I asked him on speaker with my boss in the room, who also said hello when I answered, if he wanted me to stand at the clock and wait for the exact times to clock in and out. He said that would be acceptable, and my boss said, "Are you going to pay him time for standing at the clock on company property?" CFO was about to say no when I guess his brain jumped into gear and realized he was about to suggest something illegal. I explained that I sent CFO an email explaining that this would happen, copied to my boss, and that he never responded. He was warned and still decided to stick to his guns. "Go ahead and edit your times," he said dejectedly. "Oh no, sir. He'll just keep doing what he's been doing. It balances out because he puts in so much extra work. It's only fair," says my boss. Now I get about an hour of overtime and am left alone by the CFO. So glad I'm not on salary. I love that OP's been the superstar of this place for so long and finally asks for a raise, and the CFO thinks they're gonna try to take advantage of it by reporting more hours worked. when a simple look over the past 3 years OP's been there would probably tell you that they're probably working more than 40 hours per week, and that's why they're editing the hours. But stick to your guns, see how it ends up. And our final story of the day is by Hello is Clay. Sick, but you still want me in? Okay. Someone else's puke story reminded me of this one. Back in the early 2000s, I worked at UPS loading trucks. I had been there over a year, was well known throughout the building for picking up shifts and being a good worker, and had gained a bit of seniority in the union. Our normal shift was 5 hours, with anything over 25 hours a week being overtime, so I tried to pick up as many extra shifts as I could. Anyone working in a union shop knows a lot runs on union seniority, and picking up extra shifts at UPS was the same way. Most seniority got first pick, and it went down the line until all the shifts were filled. Early on, I made a reputation of working my butt off, so some of these shift soups would delay asking for a fill-in until some of the senior guys left. As could be expected, this upset a couple of people when they got passed over, and I got some FaceTime with the union reps on every shift. Ultimately though, this just led to me becoming friends with the reps and doesn't have any bearing on the story until later. So as I mentioned, I had a reputation through a lot of the soups of busting my butt, working hard, and always being available. That said, my normal shift soup hated me for some reason. I think it was because he was an old retired military vet, and I was a punk 18-year-old with hair down to my shoulders, piercings, and didn't give a freak about impressing him in any way except through loading trucks. With us butting heads, I'd brought up a couple issues with my union rep friends, but nothing ever was serious enough to push the issue. That is, until I got sick. I was in that state where things were coming out of both ends non-stop. I wasn't getting out of bed for anything if I could help it, so I called in. UPS policy at the time was as long as you let the soup know something like an hour or more before a shift, it wasn't considered a no-call, no-show. I called right at the hour mark, and my soup told me if I didn't come in, I was going to be written up for a no-call. Malicious compliance time. I rolled up to the warehouse looking like death. I decided to load up on fluids on the way in preparation for loading trucks after a day of non-stop puking and pooping. We had to go through security and metal detectors before a half-a-mile walk to the building, then another quarter-mile or so to my load once inside. Those fluids started coming up just through security, and I also had to stop in the building on the way to my load to avail myself of the commode. At my load, my soup started going over pre-shift stuff while I'm standing towards the back next to a trash can. Those that hadn't been near me on the walk in already heard about my compliance, so I had a nice free ring of space around me when I started projectile vomiting into the trash can and over the surrounding area. Immediately, my soup shut down the meeting, told everyone to go to work, and then asked me what the freak I was doing there in that condition. I don't know, soup. It may have had something to do with you telling me I'd be written up if I didn't come in. I got sent home. Does the story end there? Would I still be typing if it did? The freaker decided to still write me up for a no-call, no-show. I what the freaked him when he handed me the write-up, and he said to take it up with the union if I had a problem. Okay, ding ding, round 2, mother freaker. Remember those union rep friends that I'd made from picking up shifts and working my butt off? Yep, I went in search of one and had a chat. He'd already heard about my ordeal, a mile worth of warehouse space, and word still traveled faster than it would have if we shared a cubicle. He knew I had been in the warehouse puking, and if I was there, how could I have not shown up? And if my soup was the one that sent me home after I showed up, how could the write-up be my fault at all? So we roped in HR. HR was involved in all the official write-ups and hadn't heard the story, but was aware of the write-up. So union rep and I told her the story. She called down and asked the soup to come over to her office. He came and recounted the same story. When asked if I'd called, he said yes. If asked if I still showed, he said yes. When asked if he'd sent me home, he reiterated that he had. When asked how I could be a no-call, no-show when I'd called, showed, and had been sent home, he didn't have an answer. I was dismissed to go back to work. He was not. Unfortunately, I don't have the details on what exactly happened with him. My union rep buddy did say that I wasn't the only one that had been passing along issues for a while, but this was the first they could really do anything about. Being management, soup wasn't part of the union, and the union rep wouldn't say much else other than it was settled. When a union rep tells you it's settled and they can't say more, my experience has been that they're absolutely right. The soup kept his distance and didn't speak much to me afterwards outside of what was absolutely necessary. So, does the supervisor not understand how a no-call, no-show is supposed to work? If somebody called and then actually showed up and then you sent them home, you can't say that they no-called, no-showed. Just because they didn't work the full day doesn't mean it was a no-show. That's wishful thinking. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.